The taste of her was still on my lips. Vintage champagne and something sharper, like ozone before a storm. Allison's hand trembled where it rested against my neck, her thumb tracing the pulse that hammered there, betraying the terrifying reality beneath her composure. The darkness of the penthouse suite felt heavy, suffocating, a sudden and violent contrast to the brightness of the gala we'd just left. She leaned in, her breath hot against my ear, shattering the intimacy of the moment with a whisper that froze my blood. "They know you're here, and they're coming." The lock on the heavy oak door clicked shut, a final mechanical sound that sealed us in. It wasn't just a corporate scandal anymore. The board had sent the cleaners, and the night had only just begun.
3 hours earlier, the only danger in the room was the open bar and the predatory networking of the C-suite elite. The annual shareholders' gala was a suffocating mix of expensive perfume, desperate ambition, and the low hum of servers humming in the basement. I stood near the periphery, nursing a drink I didn't want, watching the room rotate around a single point of gravity. Allison. She moved through the crowd not like a CEO, but like a weather system. People leaned in when she passed, pulled by a force they couldn't name but felt compelled to orbit. As a senior data analyst, I was paid to find patterns in chaos, and the pattern here was obvious. Everyone wanted a piece of her, and she was letting none of them have it.
She caught my eye across the room. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a target acquisition. She cut through the crowd, bypassing 2 VPs and a senator, coming straight for me. Up close, the magnetism was physical, a static charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. She wore a dress that looked like spilled mercury, fluid and dangerous. "Lydia," she said, her voice dropping an octave, intimate despite the noise. "Your report on the encryption anomalies, it was thorough. It was accurate," I corrected, my throat tight. "Our firewall has holes. Big ones."
I know.
She stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way that felt like an invitation rather than an affront. "That's why I need you to walk me through it. Not here. Somewhere quiet."
We talked about protocols and packet loss, but the subtext was a different conversation entirely. Every time she said access, her gaze dropped to my mouth. Every time I said vulnerability, she smiled like she knew exactly where mine were. We were discussing digital penetration testing, but the pressure in my chest tightened, heavy with the undeniable reality that we were really talking about control. Then came the glitch. She pulled out her phone to check a notification, and I saw it. A flash of red code on her screen that vanished a second later. A standard user wouldn't have noticed, but I lived in the back end. That wasn't a notification. It was a system override attempt, a remote handshake. Someone was trying to clone her device. "Allison," I said, voice low.
"Your phone. Who has admin privileges besides you?" She froze, the playful mask slipping for a fraction of a second.
"Nobody. Why?" "Because someone just pinged your geolocation. And it wasn't the network. That was a localized handshake request."
She stared at me, unblinking. The air between us shifted, the sultry game replaced by cold calculation. She didn't panic. She calculated. "The terrace," she said, her voice devoid of the earlier warmth. "We need to discuss this where the signal is weaker. Now." She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked toward the private elevators, expecting me to follow. I should have stayed. I should have gone back to the bar, ordered a taxi, and gone home to my safe, quiet apartment. But the pull was undeniable. I followed her. The elevator ride up to the penthouse level was a study in silence. The doors slid shut, sealing out the noise of the party, leaving us in a mirrored box that smelled of her, sandalwood and steel. She didn't look at me, but I could see her reflection in the brass paneling. Her jaw was set, her hands clenched at her sides. The professional veneer was cracking, revealing the woman underneath, and she looked terrified. Not of the hackers, I realized. She was terrified of what she was about to ask me to do. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, amplified by the smooth hum of the lift rising. We were alone, suspended above the city lights. Two people standing on the edge of a precipice we couldn't see yet. The doors opened and the cold wind hit us.
The terrace was a brutalist slab of concrete jutting into the night, exposed to a wind that felt vicious this high up. It cut through my blazer like the fabric wasn't there, biting at my skin. But the heat lamps overhead cast a deceptive amber warmth that pooled around us. Allison walked to the railing, looking out over the sprawl of the city, a grid of glittering lights that looked less like a home, more like a circuit board she was tired of managing. She didn't check her phone again. She just stood there, shoulders dropping, the rigid posture of the CEO dissolving into something human and exhausted. I joined her, keeping distance, though every instinct I had screamed to close the gap.
"They're vultures," she said, not looking at me. Her voice was barely audible over the wind. "Down there, in the ballroom. They smile and drink my liquor, but they're waiting for me to bleed." She turned then, and the look in her eyes wasn't the commanding gaze of a woman who ran a Fortune 500 company. It was naked vulnerability. She looked like she'd been holding her breath for a decade. "You didn't look at me like that down there, Lydia. You looked at me like I was a puzzle you were trying to solve."
"I'm an analyst," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest.
"I look for problems." Allison laughed, a low, dry sound, and stepped closer. The distance between us evaporated. She reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric of my sleeve before resting lightly on my forearm. The heat of her hand burned through the silk. "That's what I like about you," she murmured. "It's not the deference. God knows I have enough of that. It's your quiet intensity. You stand in the corner and you dismantle the world with your eyes." She wasn't talking about my data models anymore. She was mapping me, reading the tension in my jaw, the way my breath hitched.
The silence grew heavy, weighted with something more dangerous than the impending storm. She tilted her head, searching my face for permission, for a signal. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just leaned in. The gap closed. Her lips were soft, surprising given the hard lines of her reputation, and she tasted of the vintage champagne we'd left downstairs. Sweet, sharp, and intoxicating. It wasn't tentative. It was a collision. Her hand slid up my arm to cup my neck, her thumb pressing against my pulse, grounding me as the world tilted on its axis. For a few seconds, the data breaches, the board members, the red warning lights, they all ceased to exist. There was only the pressure of her mouth and the terrifying realization that I was falling for the one person I couldn't afford to want. Then, the reality of our situation vibrated against her wrist. It wasn't a subtle buzz. It was a violent, sustained alarm from her smartwatch that jarred through her bone and straight into my skin. She pulled back instantly, the softness vanishing from her eyes as if it had never been there. She looked at the watch face, and the blood drained from her complexion, leaving her pale and ghostly under the amber lamps. "No," she whispered. It was a sound of absolute devastation. She tapped the screen, her movements frantic now. "Protocol Zero. They actually did it!" She looked up at me, and the fear I saw there was contagious. "Lydia, listen to me. Protocol Zero isn't a restart. It's a purge. It means the board has authorized a total asset liquidation, physical and digital." She grabbed my hand, her grip bruising. "They aren't just wiping the servers. They're removing the people who have access to them." "We have to go," she said, pulling me toward the heavy service door, away from the elevators we'd just used. "The elevators are death traps now. If they control the building, they control the cars." She kicked off her heels, leaving expensive Italian leather on the concrete, and shoved the heavy door open. The darkness of the emergency stairwell swallowed us whole. The romance was over. Survival had just begun. The stairwell was a vertical tunnel of cold concrete and fluorescent hum,
a brutal contrast to the plush velvet world we had just fled. The air here tasted of dust and unwashed maintenance uniforms. Allison was moving fast, her bare feet slapping against the metal treads of the stairs, the expensive silk of her dress gathering dirt at the hem. I followed, my own heels discarded on the landing above, the cold steel biting into my soles. Every echo sounded like a gunshot. Every creak of the railing sounded like pursuit. We weren't just descending. We were dropping out of the world I understood into something subterranean and violent. "Slow down," I hissed, my voice bouncing off the cinder blocks. "You said cleaners. That usually implies lawyers with shredders, not this." Allison stopped on the landing of the 30th floor, gripping the railing until her knuckles turned white. She turned to me, and in the harsh strip lighting, the glamour was gone. She looked sharp, dangerous, and cornered. "The board isn't a group of investors, Lydia. You've seen the data streams. You know where the money really comes from. It's a shadow cabal managing global risk. They don't fire CEOs who become liabilities. They delete them." She took a breath, her chest heaving. "And anyone who has seen the pattern." I stared at her, my analyst brain trying to reconfigure the variables. "I haven't seen the pattern. I just found a glitch." "You found the back door they used to destabilize markets," she corrected. "And you're the only one with the keys to lock it." She stepped closer, and the look on her face shifted from fear to a calculated desperation that chilled me more than the wind on the terrace. "I didn't just come to you because of the chemistry, Lydia. I didn't pull you out of that party just because I wanted to kiss you." The words landed like a physical blow. The memory of her mouth on mine, the taste of champagne, the heat, it all suddenly felt like a transaction. A social engineering hack. "You need my access," I said, the realization tasting like ash. "The legacy servers. My biometric clearance hasn't been revoked yet." "I need your retina scan to override the kill switch," she admitted, her gaze unflinching. "I like you, Lydia. That part is real. The pull, that's real. But right now, I need you because you are the only person in this building who can stop them from erasing my existence." I should have turned around. I should have walked back up the stairs and taken my chances with the lawyers. But the adrenaline was a drug. And beneath the betrayal, the attraction was still there, pulsing like an infected wound. She was using me, yes, but she was also the only thing anchoring me to reality. Before I could answer, the heavy steel door 3 floors above us slammed open. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap of metal on metal that shook the railing under my hand. Heavy boots hit the concrete, not the rhythmic click of dress shoes, but the dull, heavy thud of tactical gear. "Move," Allison whispered. She didn't wait for my consent. She grabbed my wrist, her grip tight and terrified, and pulled me down the next flight. We couldn't outrun them. They were moving with the speed of professionals clearing a room. We reached the maintenance level, a half floor filled with HVAC ducts and electrical panels. Allison yanked me toward a recessed alcove behind a massive air handler, shoving me into the shadows before squeezing in beside me. The space was impossibly small. We were pressed together, chest to chest, legs tangled in the dark. The dust smelled of ozone and old grease, but underneath it, I could smell her. Sandalwood and the sharp metallic scent of fear. Her back was against the cold metal of the duct, and I was pressed against her, my hands hovering near her waist, unsure of where to land. The darkness was absolute, save for the sliver of light from the stairwell door. We heard them pass on the landing above. The heavy tread of boots slowed, paused. A radio crackled, short, encrypted bursts of static. Allison stopped breathing. Her hand found the back of my neck, forcing my head down into the crook of her shoulder, hiding my face. I could feel the frantic hammer of her heart against my own chest, a rapid-fire rhythm that betrayed her icy exterior. In the dark, the power dynamic shifted. She wasn't the CEO anymore. She was just a woman trembling in the arms of the only person who could save her. "If they open this door," she breathed against my ear, the words barely a ghost of sound. We don't surrender. Do you understand?
The sheer proximity was dizzying. Even terrified, even knowing I was being used, the sensation of her body pressed along the length of mine was electric. It was a confused, sultry panic, the urge to survive warring with the urge to lean into the heat she radiated. I nodded against her shoulder, my hands finally settling on her waist, grounding us both. The boots moved on, the heavy door below us opening and closing with a hydraulic hiss. They had bypassed our floor. Allison let out a shuddering breath, her forehead resting against mine for a second. A moment of shared, intimate relief that felt more dangerous than the men with guns. Then she pulled back, the mask reforming instantly. "The alley," she said, her voice steadying. "My driver is waiting at the south exit. We have 3 minutes before they realize we aren't on the roof." She took my hand again, but this time I squeezed back. We burst out of the stairwell and into the loading dock, the night air hitting us like a physical force. A black, unmarked sedan idled in the shadows of the alley, its engine a low, predatory growl. We were alive, but as I slid into the back seat, I knew the cost of that survival was going to be higher than just my job. The car was a sealed capsule, cutting through the city like a knife through dark water. The driver was a silhouette, with no name and a neck thick with muscle. He existed in the space between us without acknowledgement, without sound, ignoring the fact that his passenger was currently barefoot and shivering in a dress that cost more than the vehicle. The silence in the back seat wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressurized by the adrenaline slowly metabolizing into dread. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks of neon and sodium orange, a beautiful, indifferent world that felt a million miles away from the cage we were in. Allison hadn't let go of me. Her hand rested on my knee, her fingers digging into the skin through the thin silk of my dress. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not really. It was a grounding anchor. She was holding on to me like I was the only solid object in a universe that had suddenly liquefied. I watched her profile as we passed under streetlights. The sharp line of her jaw, the tension in her neck, the way her eyes darted to the side mirrors every 30 seconds. She was calculating survival probabilities, but her hand on my leg was rigid. That tension traveled through my skin and settled in my chest, a terrifying counterpoint to her absolute stillness. We didn't stop at a hotel. We didn't stop at a house. The car wound its way into the industrial district, where the buildings were skeletal and the shadows were long. We pulled into the underground garage of a converted warehouse, a brutalist slab of concrete and steel that looked more like a bunker than a residence. The driver killed the engine. "Wait here," he grunted, the first word spoken in 20 minutes. He swept the perimeter, then opened Allison's door. The apartment was on the top floor, accessible only by a freight elevator that required a keycard and a 6-digit code. Inside, the space was vast, stark, and aggressively secure. Exposed piping, polished concrete floors, and windows made of ballistic glass. It smelled of stale air and disuse. There were no personal touches, no photos, no art, just high-end furniture arranged with geometric precision. It was a safe house designed for people who didn't expect to survive long enough to get comfortable. Allison moved to the kitchen island, her movements stiff, jerky. She reached for a glass and a pitcher of water, but as she tried to pour, the tremor in her hand took over. The glass clattered against the pitcher, a sharp, fragile sound that echoed in the empty room. Water splashed onto the concrete counter. She froze, staring at the spill, and I saw her shoulders hunch. The adrenaline crash hit her all at once. She wasn't the CEO anymore. She was just a woman who had run out of road. I moved before I thought about it. I crossed the space between us, my bare feet silent on the cold floor, and gently took the pitcher from her hands. Her skin was ice cold. "Let me," I said softly. I poured the water, set the glass down, and then, because I couldn't help myself, I covered her shaking hand with mine. She looked up at me, eyes wide and dark. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I needed someone who could see the code.
I didn't mean to drag you into the crosshairs.
You timed it, I said, the accusation low but necessary. The gala, the approach. You knew I'd be there. You knew I'd say yes to the terrace. I knew you were the best analyst in the company, she countered, but she didn't pull her hand away. She stepped closer, invading my space again, bringing that scent of sandalwood and fear with her. But the rest? The way you look at me? The way I feel when you're this close? I didn't calculate that, Lydia. That's the variable I couldn't control. And it's the reason we're in more danger, not less. If you were just an employee, I wouldn't care if you walked out that door. But I can't let you leave. The space between us vanished, replaced by a magnetic pull that had nothing to do with the gunmen outside. She was inches away. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a sultry, undeniable pull that overrode the logic screaming in my brain. Her gaze dropped to my lips, unflinching, hungry. We leaned in, a magnetic, inevitable slide toward each other. My breath hitched. I wanted to kiss her. I wanted to forget the board and the kill squads and just drown in the sensation of her. But the room was too cold, the silence too heavy. The reality of the safe house, the ballistic glass, the locked doors, intruded. We froze, lips a breath apart, suspended in the almost. Then, slowly, painfully, I pulled back. The terminal, I said, my voice rough. Show me the terminal. If I don't fix this, neither of us gets to find out what happens next. She nodded, a micro-expression of regret flashing across her face before the mask snapped back into place. She pointed to a workstation in the corner, a rig that looked powerful enough to run a small country. I sat down, the familiar click of the mechanical keyboard grounding me. I was the analyst again. This was my domain. I plugged in, bypassed the local encryption, and brought the system online. The monitors flickered to life, bathing the brutalist room in a harsh blue glow. Then, abruptly, the light shifted. A siren didn't sound, but it might as well have. The screens turned a violent, pulsing red. Warning banners cascaded down the display, locking out commands. "Allison?" I said, the blood draining from my face. "We have a problem." She was at my shoulder instantly, her hand on the back of my chair, leaning over me. "What is it?" "It's not just a purge," I said, watching the code rewrite itself in real time. "It's a hostile takeover. They aren't just deleting you. They're rewriting history." The screen wasn't just showing a breach. It was showing an execution. I watched in horrified fascination as the script unspooled across the monitors, a cascading waterfall of red code that was systematically dismantling Allison's life. It started with the obvious assets, bank accounts freezing, credit lines snapping shut, but then it went deeper, clawing into the bedrock of her identity. Her citizenship status was flagged as fraudulent. Her university degrees were dissolving from the registrar's database. The board wasn't just firing her, they were unmaking her. They were turning one of the most powerful women in the city into a ghost, a non-person who couldn't rent a car, board a plane, or even prove she had been born. "They're scrubbing the metadata," I whispered, the blue light of the terminal reflecting in my glasses. "It's a scorched earth protocol. In 10 minutes, you won't exist." Allison stood behind me, her hand gripping the back of my chair so hard the leather creaked. For the first time all night, she was utterly powerless. In the boardroom, she was a predator. Here, in the realm of binary and packet loss, she was prey. She knew it, and the shift in gravity between us was palpable. I wasn't the subordinate anymore. I was the gatekeeper. I took a breath, cracked my knuckles, a nervous tic I'd never outgrown, and dove into the architecture. I stopped thinking in English and started thinking in syntax. My fingers flew across the mechanical keys, the rhythmic clatter sounding like gunfire in the concrete silence of the room. I wasn't fighting people. I was fighting a hydra. Every time I patched a vulnerability, 2 more opened up.
I bypassed the primary firewall, routed our connection through a server farm in Reykjavik to mask our signature, and started hunting for the source of the kill command. The code was elegant, vicious, and familiar. It was using the same backdoor I had tried to warn her about on the terrace, a vulnerability that had been left open like a wound.
"Can you stop it?" Allison asked, her voice tight, hovering right at my ear.
"I can't stop it," I said, my eyes darting across 3 different data streams. "But I can freeze it. I can put the system in a deadlock loop." I hit a wall, a heavy encryption layer protecting the core deletion command. "Got you." I pointed to a pulsating line of code at the center of the screen. "That's the kill switch. It's a legacy command from the Founders era, but it's air-gapped. To execute the override, I need a 2-key authorization." I spun the chair around to face her. "I need your executive passkey, and I need a biometric override from a senior analyst. That's me."
She didn't hesitate. She stepped into the space between my knees, the proximity sudden and overwhelming. The terminal was cramped, forcing her to lean over me to reach the keypad. The scent of her, vintage champagne, cold wind, and the warm musk of fear filled my senses. She was so close that the silk of her dress brushed against my cheek as she reached for the keyboard. My breath hitched, trapping itself in my throat. This was professional, purely survival, yet it felt obscenely intimate. "Type it," I murmured,
my voice betraying me. Allison leaned further, her body a warm weight pressing against my shoulder. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned chill of the server room. Her hair fell forward, a curtain of dark silk that shielded us from the rest of the room, creating a private, breathless world. Her fingers were stiff as she keyed in the sequence, her arm brushing against mine with every keystroke. The friction sent a jolt of static through me that had nothing to do with the electronics. "Done," she whispered, pulling back just enough to look at me. Her eyes were dark, dilated, searching mine for something that wasn't code. "Now you." I turned back to the screen, my pulse hammering as I initiated the biometric scan. The laser swept my retina. Access granted. I slammed the enter key to execute the freeze. The red warning banners vanished, replaced by a single, pulsing green command line. "System locked."
"We did it,"
Allison breathed, her hand finding my shoulder, squeezing. But the green light didn't stay steady. It blinked once, twice. Then it turned a solid, unblinking amber. A new message scrolled across the screen, simple and terrifying. "Geolocation confirmed." My stomach dropped through the floor. "No," I gasped. "It wasn't a kill switch. It was a beacon." I looked up at her, the realization crashing over us both. We hadn't stopped the purge. We had just rung the dinner bell. The lights in the apartment died instantly, plunging us into absolute, suffocating blackness. We were found. The silence that followed the blackout lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, the night exploded. It wasn't the cinematic crash of a single window breaking. It was a coordinated, percussive shattering of the ballistic glass in the main atrium. Canisters hissed as they skittered across the polished concrete floor, spewing gas, and the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots vibrated through the soles of my feet. They weren't moving like police. They were moving like a liquidation team. "Down," Allison hissed, her voice a wire pulled tight. She didn't drag me toward the exit. She knew the perimeter was already compromised. Instead, she dropped to her knees at the base of the massive server rack, her fingers clawing at the edge of a floor panel. "Help me, now." I understood instantly. The server room was built on a raised floor for cooling and cabling. It was a labyrinth of darkness beneath our feet. I jammed my fingers into the gap, adrenaline giving me the strength to heave the heavy metal tile upward. The space below was a narrow, dusty throat of steel supports and thick bundles of fiber optic cables that pulsed with the faint, residual heat of the data streams we had just killed. "Get in," she ordered, shoving me toward the hole. I dropped into the crawlspace, the metal grid biting into my knees. It was a suffocating squeeze, a tangled web of wires that smelled of copper, ozone, and decades of trapped dust. Allison slid in beside me, pulling the floor tile back into place above us. The heavy click of the lock engaging plunged us into absolute, crushing darkness. We were buried alive. Above us, the room was being dissected. I could hear the sweep of their movements, efficient, brutal, and searching. Flashlight beams cut through the narrow gaps in the floor tiles, slicing the darkness into geometric ribbons of blinding white light that danced inches from our faces. I stopped breathing. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I was terrified the sound would echo through the floorboards. Allison shifted, her body pressing the length of mine into the cold concrete subfloor. There was no space for modesty or hesitation. She was on top of me, her weight a heavy, grounding anchor in the chaos. Her hand came up, clamping firmly over my mouth to stifle the gasp building in my throat. Her skin was damp with sweat, muscles coiled tight, but her grip was iron. In the dark, with the enemy boots stomping inches above our heads, the intimacy was overwhelming. I could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest against mine, the heat of her thigh wedged between my legs, the frantic rhythm of her pulse against my cheek. It was terrifying, and, God help me, it was electric. "They aren't here for the money," she whispered, her lips bruising against my ear, the sound barely a breath. "Lydia, you have to understand. The data on those servers, it isn't financial records." I stared up into the darkness, my eyes adjusting enough to see the silhouette of her face hovering above me. The realization hit me colder than the floor. "It's leverage," I breathed against her palm. "The board. Global risk. You're holding blackmail material."
"I'm not just holding it," she confessed, the words tasting of bile.
"I'm the gatekeeper. Every dirty secret, every covert operation, every rigged election the board has managed in the last 20 years. It's all here. That's why they initiated Protocol Zero. They aren't trying to hide a deficit. They're trying to bury the bodies." She wasn't innocent. She wasn't just a CEO caught in a coup. She was the architect of the vault. The woman I had kissed on the terrace, the woman whose body was currently shielding mine, was a monster by any ethical standard. But as the boots paused directly above our heads, the moral calculus dissolved. I didn't care what she had done. I just wanted her to survive. "They're going to sweep the room with thermal," she whispered, pulling back just enough to look me in the eyes. Even in the shadows, her gaze was fierce, devastating. "They'll see our heat signatures through the floor in about 30 seconds. Then we run," I said, grabbing her wrist. "No, I run." She pressed a small, cold object into my hand, a solid-state drive, heavy and warm from her pocket. "This is the backup, the real one. If I don't come back, you upload this to the public server node I showed you. You burn them all down." "Allison, don't." "Stay here. Wait for the chaos." She kissed me then, hard, desperate, a collision of teeth and terror that tasted of finality. Then she was gone. She shoved the floor tile up, scrambling out into the open room. "Hey!" she screamed, her voice shattering the silence. "Over here!" I heard the rush of movement, the shouts of men, and the sickening sound of a struggle. Then, the heavy door slammed shut, and the room above me went silent. I was alone in the dark, clutching the drive that could destroy the world, listening to the woman I was falling for being dragged away to her death. The silence left behind was a physical weight, pressing me into the concrete subfloor. I was alone in the dark, clutching the drive Allison had pressed into my palm, a small, cold piece of metal that weighed more than the building above me. The vent system was right there. I could crawl away, disappear into the city, change my name and never look back. But the iron taste of her blood was still on my lips. She had walked out there to die for me. I couldn't just walk away. I wasn't a soldier. I couldn't storm the room with a gun. But I was an analyst, and this was my environment. I rolled onto my stomach, fumbling in the dark until my fingers found the maintenance port on the underside of the server rack. I pulled the interface cable from my pocket and jacked in. My phone screen lit up, casting a ghostly blue glow over the dust bunnies and cabling. I didn't need to hack the gunman. I needed to hack the room itself. I bypassed the security lockout on the building management system in 12 seconds. I found the fire suppression controls. Modern systems used clean agents, breathless and efficient. But this old industrial bunker was retrofitted with Halon 1301. It didn't just put out fires. It sucked the oxygen out of the room to starve them. It was dangerous, illegal, and exactly what I needed. I typed the override code and hit execute. Above me, the world hissed. It was a violent, pressurized sound, like a jet engine starting up indoors. The heavy thud of boots turned into a chaotic scramble. I heard coughing, shouting, the panic of men who suddenly realized the air in their lungs was useless. The door slammed open and then shut again as they retreated, choosing survival over the mission. I waited 10 seconds for the gas to dissipate, then shoved the floor tile up. The room was filled with a thick, white chemical fog, swirling in the emergency lights like a manufactured storm. I climbed out, my limbs shaking, coughing against the acrid taste of the suppressant. "Allison!" I screamed, the sound tearing at my throat. I found her slumped against the far wall near the exit. She was conscious, gasping for air, a bruise blooming dark and violent across her cheekbone. She looked broken, but when she saw me, her eyes flared with a fierce, terrified relief. "You stayed," she rasped, her voice wrecked. I didn't answer. I dropped to my knees and pulled her into me. It wasn't a gentle embrace. It was a collision. I buried my face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her sweat and the chemical tang of the gas, grounding myself in the fact that she was warm. She was solid. She was alive. Her hands clutched at my back, holding on as if gravity had failed. We were just two bodies clinging to each other in the wreckage. "We're not done," I whispered against her skin. I pulled back, gripping her face. "The drive. We have to finish it." We stumbled back to the terminal. The system was still locked, the amber beacon pulsing, but the local port was active. I jammed the drive in. The directory popped up. Terabytes of encrypted filth. "Lydia," Allison said, her hand covering mine on the mouse. She leaned heavily against the desk. "If you do this, if you upload this with your signature, you can never go back. You won't be an anonymous analyst anymore. You'll be the whistleblower who burned the board. They will hunt you forever." I looked at the screen, then at her. She was offering me an out. I could walk away and keep my quiet life. I looked at the bruise on her face. I remembered the way she'd stepped between me and the gunman. The choice wasn't about data or politics. It was about her. "I don't want to go back," I said. "Not to a life without this." I covered her hand with mine and pressed enter. Upload initiated. The progress bar appeared, a green line inching forward with agonizing slowness. 10%. 20%. It was the ticking clock of our old lives ending. Outside, the wail of sirens began to rise, cutting through the night. The police were coming. The board was coming. But the data was moving faster. Upload complete. The green text flashed, illuminating our faces. It was done. We had just declared war on the world. And looking at Allison, seeing the slow, dangerous smile spreading across her lips, I knew I'd do it again. The sunrise wasn't beautiful. It was a harsh, gray interrogation light, filtering through the shattered ballistic glass, illuminating the wreckage of the night. The halogen gas had dissipated, leaving behind a chemical film on every surface, a fine white dust that coated the expensive Italian furniture like frost. We sat on the floor of the ruined living room, backs against the kitchen island, watching the city wake up below us. The sirens had faded hours ago, replaced by the distant, indifferent hum of traffic. The world hadn't ended. It had just rebooted. Allison sat a foot away from me, The distance was small physically, but metaphorically, it was widening by the second. She had retrieved a backup phone from a hidden cache I hadn't even noticed, and for the last hour, she had been orchestrating the fallout. The vulnerability of the crawlspace, the trembling hands, the desperate whispers, was gone. In the gray light, she was reassembling herself. Her spine was straight, her voice clipped and precise, as she issued orders to lawyers, PR firms, and shadow fixers I didn't know existed.
The data dump hit the Asian markets first, she said, ending a call and staring at the screen. The board is hemorrhaging credibility. 3 resignations already. The stock is in free fall, which means I can buy back a controlling interest by noon. She looked at me then, and the triumphant gleam in her eyes was terrifying. They're scrambling to survive the news cycle. They can't touch us now. It's over, I said, the words tasting metallic. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in soot and dried blood from a cut I didn't remember getting.
Allison followed my gaze. Her expression softened, the CEO mask dissolving just enough to reveal the woman who had kissed me in the dark. She reached for a bottle of water and a clean napkin from the survival kit. "Give me your hand," she ordered, but the tone was gentle. I let her take it. Her fingers were cool, steady. She poured the water over the cut on my palm, dabbing away the grime with a tenderness that made my chest ache. It was a domestic moment in the middle of a war zone. Intimate, quiet, and completely at odds with the violence that surrounded us. She traced the line of my lifeline with her thumb, her touch lingering. For a moment, just a moment, I thought maybe the power dynamic had shifted permanently. That maybe the shared trauma had welded us together. "I can protect you," she said, keeping her eyes on my hand. "I've already set up a shell corporation in your name. You'll be hired as an external security consultant. Triple your current salary, full benefits, and a signing bonus that will let you disappear for a year if you want to." I pulled my hand back slowly. The air in the room shifted, cooling instantly. "A signing bonus," I repeated. "Is that what this is? Severance?" "It's safety, Lydia." She looked up, and the softness was hardening around the edges. "You exposed the board. You're a hero, but you're also a liability. If you stay close to me, you're a target. If you're an independent contractor with a watertight NDA and a bank account in the Caymans, you're untouchable." She was managing me. I was just another asset to be secured, another variable to be stabilized. The realization hit harder than the betrayal in the stairwell. "And us?" I asked. "The terrace? The crawl space? Was that just asset management?" Allison flinched. It was microscopic, a tiny tightening of her jaw, but I saw it. She stood up, smoothing down her ruined dress, pulling the armor of her authority back around her shoulders. She walked to the broken window, looking out at the city she was about to reconquer. "It was survival, Lydia," she said, her back to me. "And it was real. Every second of it." She turned, and her eyes were guarded, walled off behind layers of necessity. But reality is a luxury I can't afford right now. The board is down, not dead. I have to finish this. And I can't do that if I'm worrying about keeping you alive. "So that's it," I said, standing up. My legs felt heavy. "Transaction complete." "Don't call it that. What else is it?" Before she could answer, the elevator dinged. The heavy door slid open, and 4 men in dark suits stepped out. They weren't the board's cleaners. They were Allison's private security, the ones who only showed up when the check cleared. They swept the room with professional indifference. "Miss Sterling," the lead guard said, nodding to Allison. "The car is downstairs. We've secured the perimeter." Allison nodded. She looked at me one last time, and for a second, I saw the regret. It was deep and genuine, a crack in the facade. But then she blinked, and the CEO was back. "Escort Ms. Rivera to her apartment," she commanded, her voice devoid of emotion. "And ensure the transfer is processed by end of day." She walked past me without touching me. The air where she had stood felt colder than the wind on the terrace. I watched her go, surrounded by her phalanx of paid protectors, and realized that the most dangerous thing in the room hadn't been the gun or the gas. It was the hope that I was anything more than collateral damage in her rise to power. The walk to the curb felt less like an exit and more like a funeral procession for a future that hadn't even had time to take its first breath. Allison's security team moved with fluid, practiced aggression, inserting their bodies between us like human firewalls, effectively severing the connection we had forged in the dark. We stepped out of the lobby and into the blinding, abrasive morning light of the financial district. The air smelled of exhaust, wet pavement, and the indifferent hustle of a city that had no idea it had almost ended the night before. It stripped away the cinematic tension of the penthouse, replacing it with the gritty, high-contrast reality of 8 a.m. Allison stopped by the open door of her armored SUV. She turned to me, and for a heartbeat, the bustling noise of the street seemed to dampen. She looked immaculate, despite the ruined hem of her dress and the fatigue bruising the skin beneath her eyes. This was the beat in the script where the adrenaline usually solidifies into romance, where the survivors kiss amidst the wreckage. But we weren't in a movie. We were in a merger, and the deal had just closed. She didn't lean in. She didn't pull me close to whisper promises of a reunion. Instead, she reached out, her hand hovering for a fraction of a second before her fingers brushed my cheek. It was a ghost of a touch, light, fleeting, and maddeningly restrained. It was a goodbye, not an invitation.
"Check your pocket," she murmured,
Her voice low, slipping under the radar of the guards flanking us. I reached into my blazer, my hand trembling slightly. My fingers closed around a sleek, unfamiliar phone that definitely wasn't mine. I pulled it out, the screen lighting up instantly with a biometric prompt that accepted my thumbprint. A banking app opened, displaying a notification from a private equity firm in Zurich. The number that flashed across the screen was staggering. 7 figures, labeled simply as a consulting fee. It was enough money to buy my silence, my loyalty, and a new life 3 time zones away. It was enough to ensure I never had to look at a line of code again unless I wanted to. I looked up at her, the screen still glowing in my hand like a radioactive isotope. "Allison, you're the best analyst I've ever met, Lydia," she said, and the compliment felt like a surgical blade, precise and cutting. "Don't waste it on sentiment." She wasn't apologizing. She was paying me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow to the chest. The chemistry, the terror, the intimacy in the crawlspace, it was all data to her. Variables she had managed perfectly to ensure the survival of her empire. She had leveraged my attraction to save herself, and now she was balancing the ledger. The love was there. I saw it in the way her gaze lingered on my mouth, unflinching and regretful. But her ambition was an apex predator, and it had just eaten us alive. "Goodbye, Allison," I said, the words tasting like copper and ash. "Be safe, Lydia." She turned and slid into the back seat, the heavy door thudding shut to seal her back inside her world of power. I stood on the curb, clutching the phone that proved I was rich and the memory that proved I was a fool, watching the SUV merge into the river of traffic until it was just another black car in a city full of them. I turned away from the street and walked back into the ordinary world, but the city looked different now. The money in the offshore account is real. The promotion is real. But my apartment is empty, and the silence is louder than the sirens ever were. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the gun, or the board, or the code that can erase you. It's the person who holds your hand while the world burns, only to let go when the fire goes out. If you've ever been the one left standing in the quiet after the storm, hit subscribe and tell me your story in the comments.